Welcome into today's edition of the 5 Reasons Podcast. My name is Chris Whittingham, joined as always by Ethan Skolnick. If you have just found us, please do subscribe to the program on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Spotify, a great one because it's on all the platforms and it's fairly intuitive with how you listen to your music. So check out the 5 Reasons Podcast on there. Check out all the podcasts in our network. Of course, we're talking some NBA today, so check out Miami Heat Beat on the Miami Heat, really dialing in on the day-to-day with this team. Check out HeatBeatMiami.com as well for the latest written coverage on the team. They do a terrific job over at Miami Heat Beat. Thanks to all of our listeners who are checking us out on Dash Radio today, which is an app available in cars across America. If you have a new car with a fancy entertainment system and there's apps in there, you can find Dash Radio. You can check out the Nothing But Net channel, and that is where we are to listen to the program. So we're going to dive into the Miami Heat today, and Ethan, frankly, it's been a bit grim of late. We kind of wanted to frame this around a 20-game mark. You might be hearing this before or after the Heat have indeed played their 20th game against the Atlanta Hawks, and it's been a fairly grim recent stretch. They're 3-7 at home now on the season. They lose by double digits despite a 35-point Dwayne Wade performance in Toronto. They did their best to blow a double-digit lead to Chicago, but their recent run of games is 4 losses from 5, with losses at Indiana, home with the Lakers, home with Brooklyn, the lone win at Chicago, and then at Toronto. And in this kind of stretch of double-digit losses, of home losses, there's been a throwing around of the T word. The T word is something that I have thrown around before, particularly 2 years ago, that it got me derided quite a bit on the internet involving Miami Heat fans. But they're 7-12 right now. The T word, of course, being tanking. They are in the context of the Eastern Conference. They're 5th from bottom, tied with the Washington Wizards on overall record. They're tied with the New York Knicks actually in the win column because the Knicks have gone and done a bad thing, which is win 3 in a row. And then you have Cleveland, who's won 2 in a row at the bottom, along with Atlanta. In the greater context of the league, the Heat are also 6th from bottom. So it's not a terrible position to be in terms of the lottery. But Ethan, I feel like we should dive into the idea of tanking and losing for this team, because you just flatly believe, correct, that they're a bad basketball team.
Yeah, I think that's where we're at right now. And I know that there's pushback from the organization on this because there's a feeling that they haven't had their entire basketball team. And I understand that to a degree. If you're talking about the totality of what is an enormous payroll, having all of your players clearly would be advantageous in terms of determining exactly where you are. But I do want to backtrack here real quick. I mean, it's not just us, or general people who say 20 games is the marker. Pat Riley has said that repeatedly over the course of his career. When I talk to somebody else inside the organization, they also use the 20-game marker. So I do think this is a reasonable time to take a look at where they're at. And are they a bad basketball team? To this point, yes. And I think, they're closer to the bottom of the Eastern Conference by far. They're as we speak today, they're 3.5 games ahead of the last spot in the East, and they're 9 games behind the first. That's a bad basketball team. And we can talk about what they were a couple of years ago and the 30-11 run, but remember, the 30-11 run was propelled largely by the chemistry between Dragic and Waiters in the backcourt. And now you have Dragic, and I've talked about, the fact that when you have teams like this, guys start, not because they're quitting on the team. Goran Dragic would never quit on a team. But when you have a situation where, you're not really playing for anything, it's just natural that guys tend to end up being out a little bit longer than you would anticipate with another kind of team. And so now you have Goran, who's out. You have Dion Waiters, who when I talk to people inside the Heat, they don't even mention his name. It's not even, a couple of people have, but for the most part, he's an afterthought. He's an afterthought making $52 million, okay, who's delivered nothing on the contract that they signed him to. But that's what propelled them. We can talk about James Johnson and some of the other pieces and Whiteside and everything else, but really it was Dragic and Waiters outplaying other backcourts during that run, and they don't have either of them right now. And in Waiters' case, I don't know that they're going to have an effective Waiters the entire season. I don't even think they're planning on it. So
that's crazy, though, Ethan. He had surgery in January. It's been 10 full months since that surgery, or was it even longer than that? It's been a very long time since Dion Waiters had surgery. What's happened? Like, how is this possible that a guy that they felt so confident in giving a bunch of money to, you're committed to him for 2 more years, he's a write-off? Like, that's 2 more years of a write-off. We're not talking about Joakim Noah, right, where he's just so far gone from a physical standpoint that, or Mozgov or Dang, where they're just so far gone that they're not going to contribute. Like, Dion Waiters still young. If he was healthy, he'd be contributing. Like, how has this happened?
Well, it's happened in part, I think, because they got duped to a certain degree. I mean, look, he wanted to get signed before he had the surgery, and that's just not something that this organization typically would have done. And we've talked about sort of what was around that, which is that Dion, for our understanding, and no one's ever pushed back on this when we've talked about this, Dion was not getting more than a 1-year offer from anybody else. And for some reason, the Heat decided to give him 4 years. Now, I have my theories on that. I think that Dion said and wrote, even in the Players Tribune, the right things, where he sort of gushed about
and if we're saying they went 30-11, at least in part because of Dion Waiters, then
he played a role.
He presented that value to them.
Well, and he gave them some moments that reminded them of Dwayne, particularly the Golden State moment. And this was an organization that was reeling from the big 3 guys and some of the little 12 from that group leaving sort of unhappy, right? Like, Bosh was not happy. I never blame that on the Heat, but Bosh was not happy. LeBron was not happy. Dwayne was not happy. Chalmers left unhappy. Miller left unhappy. James Jones left unhappy. Ray Allen left unhappy. I mean, that was the core of that team, and nobody was happy. Even Chris Anderson was dumped for salary reasons, right? For the luxury tax. So, like, you're talking about 8 of the 9 guys in the rotation. Add in Norris Cole, who was dumped basically, to get off of that contract, or at least clear some space when they brought in Dragic. So, what I think happened there is you had some guys who talked about the culture, and it sort of made Heat officials, particularly the guy who's making the major decisions, feel good again. And he reminded them of what they were, and it brought some excitement back to the building. And so they decided to reward Dion. But Dion was not an efficient player over the course of most of his career. And he'd also, if you talk to people in Cleveland, when I was up there that year, they did talk about sometimes his difficulty sort of staying in premier shape. And those things have come to pass now. And we did have Stefania Bell on the pod, and she did talk about some of the trickiness of his particular injury. But if you have a tricky injury, you have a surgery, and you have a guy who's not really following the protocol that the organization wants him to follow, and he has a tendency to get out of shape, that's a recipe for disaster, and that's what we've seen. And so, I'm not even counting on him at this stage. Now they add back James Johnson, and we've seen how rusty James Johnson is since he came back. So I'm going to give that a couple of weeks, okay, to see if he'll look a little bit more like he did 2 seasons ago than he looked like last season. Because so far he's looked a little like last season, but I think, again, a lot of that is rust. But getting back to your overall point, Chris, are they a bad basketball team? People in our network felt they were a slightly above average basketball team, right? Even you said 43-39. I went over on 42.5 wins, in part because I placed that bet the day I thought they were getting Jimmy Butler. Okay. So that played into it. Okay. I was using some insider information, and that backfired. I guess, if I did that on Wall Street, right, that wouldn't work out so well for me. But, I thought they'd go over because I thought Spo would coach them over, but I've never felt this was a good roster. I mean, saying that they could be a functional team because I like their coach is different from saying that I like the roster that the front office put together, in particular.
And if we're saying it's the same team that they're bringing back, they were 44-38 last year. So, I mean, it's basically the same team.
It is, and they didn't have Waiters, as you said. They didn't have Waiters for most of last season anyway, and James Johnson played hurt, and they still won 44 games. But we also talked about how I thought the East was better. We both thought the East was a little better this year, even losing LeBron out of the conference. Toronto was going to be better. Milwaukee was going to be better because they had a real coach, finally. Indiana was probably going to be improved, so you had 3 teams there. Philadelphia was probably going to be better. None of us projected what Boston was going to be so far this season, but we thought they'd be better. So best case scenario for the Heat was 6th. And I'll tell you this, when you talk to people inside the organization, they felt that was the best case scenario too, okay? Because they always talk about there being 5 teams that were locked for the playoffs, and I just mentioned them. And so the Heat kind of fell into that 6 to 8 slot, but I think people in the organization felt they could be closer to the 6. Now I think where we're at is we realize that they're closer to the 8 and maybe the 9 and maybe the 10 or somewhere in that window, because they don't have, even if you project Josh Richardson forward as a top 30 player, they don't have a top 30 player right now. Josh Richardson is having a very good year. It is, as I've said on previous pods, Eddie Jones 2002-2003. It's the same season. Richardson, okay? And Eddie Jones was a very good player. That was Eddie at 31. Josh Richardson's 25. I feel like Josh can still get better. He's not a top 30 player yet, okay? When you go through the Eastern Conference, Lefty Leif, Greg Sylvander from Miami Heat Beat was, saying about the progress Josh has made. He's totally right, but he also said he's an all-star, okay? Or he could be an all-star. You look at the Eastern Conference, I got to 12 pretty easily, okay, in terms of players in the Eastern Conference. They're going to get picked ahead of Josh. Josh is probably going to get squeezed. It's going to be a situation like last year where maybe he gets added after a couple players are hurt or don't go, like what happened with Dragic. But they don't have a legitimate all-star in the Eastern Conference, the weaker of the two conferences. So if you just start there, like their best player, if you want to say it's Josh Richardson now, I think last year we would have said it was Dragic, their best player is not the best player on 25 other teams, probably. Correct. So let's start there. Okay.
Well, and that I think is the genesis of the Jimmy Butler conversation, which is you have some promising young players, but they're not indispensable, right? And I feel like like Pat Riley eventually ended up making, because of his nice start, Josh Richardson indispensable. And I just fundamentally disagree with that. Like Josh Richardson is the gateway player to who you want to get, a top 15 guy, which Jimmy Butler is. Like, you build up Josh Richardson's value, give him a good contract so that you can go and get, even if you don't like the Jimmy Butler extension, well, then pick somebody else. Like, throw the kitchen sink at San Antonio for Kawhi. Like, you can't be holding on to this team because you really like what you've developed in Josh Richardson. Josh Richardson needs to flourish somewhere else. If the Heat are going to get back to where they want to be, which, again, a lot of people get angry with me because I don't enjoy the night to night, and I don't enjoy kind of, getting to watch an entertaining brand of basketball, and that I don't enjoy basketball enough because I want the Heat to be competing for championships. I obviously am that way because that's just sort of the way that I've been conditioned to support basketball, but Pat Riley kind of taught me that, right? That either you're winning or you're doing nothing, right? And I feel like it's and this is the thing that we've talked about a million times, but the fact that the fans, you talk about accepting mediocrity with the Dolphins. I don't want to say accepting mediocrity with the Heat because there are still, I think, plenty of people that don't like this, but there was a certain segment of the fan base like, well, let's have our fun and enjoy our young players get better. And I'm just a bit surprised that people who grew up in the Pat Riley mold, right, that listened to him, basically be your franchise leader for 25 years, are kind of okay with what's happening. Like, it's a bit strange to me.
We'll get back to our episode here in a second, but first I want to tell you about a great sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network. Just took care of a friend of mine today, and that is Brunt Insurance, where you can find all of your protection under one roof. They offer home, auto, commercial, and life insurance, and they're licensed to write insurance for the entire state of Florida. That's Pensacola all the way down to the Keys. They've got multiple carriers for all the product lines to ensure you're paying the lowest rate in your particular area. Also, they are proud sponsors of the Homes for Heroes program, which offers special discounts for first responders, teachers, military, and healthcare professionals. So make sure that you call Greg at 954-589-2204 to reach Brunt Insurance, or go to bruntinsurance.com. I think they're much less okay than Dolphin fans. And I've noticed that recently. I mean, until we had, the gay catastrophe, as I'm calling it, from Sunday in Indianapolis, and a lot of Dolphin fans turned on him. The Dolphin fans basically have been apologists, in my view, all year. Heat fans have not been apologists for long. That's in fact, I think at times, and Riley gave voice to this. I mean, at times I think they've been a little spoiled, and so they've turned on this pretty quickly. And I think they're much more practical about this stuff than Dolphin fans. I mean, their attitude now is tank, and whether we're going to discuss whether that's feasible or not. But
you think that's true? You think for the most part, most Heat fans want to be tanking?
I feel like the most active Heat fans, the ones that I interact with the most on Twitter, I think they've come to that conclusion. I mean, that's what I get in my mentions all the time, and I feel like where we're at. I feel like the Toronto game, and it's interesting we're doing this right after that. I feel like the Toronto game is exactly what a lot of Heat fans want, right? Mm-hmm. They were competitive against a really good team. They played the 3 young guys, Richardson, Adebayo, and Winslow, played exceptionally well together. They had a positive rating when the 3 were out there, and Wade went off. And I kind of feel like if you ask most Heat fans right now, because the expectations are so low for what this team can actually accomplish, like if you said, is that a reasonable outcome for you night to night? Young guys play well, Wade does something you remember, and you still lose. I feel like 85% of Heat fans would take that. Like, I didn't notice, and maybe it's because, again, the catastrophe in Indianapolis. Maybe it's because everybody was focused on that, but they're a little bit different. The two fan bases, at least the ones on social media. I mean, there's a lot of crossover, obviously, but it's not exactly the same. And I did not notice any, gnashing of teeth last night after the Toronto game. Like, I went back and, we were focused on the Dolphins. I didn't watch, I'll admit, that's the first Heat game I haven't watched the whole season because I was in transit. I'm in New York right now, and I did watch the Dolphin game. We were focusing on that for the podcast, but I did not notice anybody taking exception with the Heat. All I got was, cool, we can tank. Like, so I feel like that's the trifecta that Heat fans are comfortable with. Young guys get minutes and show promise. Wade does something you remember, lose. Like, that's where I think.
I guess my issue is what happens if the young players go from playing a lot of minutes to impacting winning, right? Like, what if they develop enough of a chemistry? As you mentioned, Richardson had a team worse. I think it was a -25 last night, but the other two guys, Winslow and Adebayo, off the bench. Winslow was a +15, Adebayo was a +1, and that in the middle of a game in which you lost by double digits and were down by even bigger over the course of the game is not something that I think is going to lead towards consistent losing. And so I guess the issue is, as much as so you think the Heat are bad, I think the Heat are below average. I don't know if I'd go to bad.
I'm not going to say they're bad. Okay. So maybe I went a little too far at the beginning. I don't think they're a bad team because I don't think they'll be a bad team unless they want to be. Let's put it that way. I don't think that, because eventually I have enough confidence in their coach to figure out enough combinations.
It took him a half a season 2 years ago. So
it took him a half a season in 2015-16 also. Actually, people don't talk about that, but the year that they ended up getting within a game of the Eastern Conference Finals, I mean, they were not great the first half of the year with Chris Bosh. I think there were 4 games over 500 at the break, from what I remember. And Bosh went out, and then he sort of by necessity put Deng at the 4, and that team took off. So it does take him some time. And I believe if the goal this year, and again, this is what we're going to discuss, if the goal this year is to turn it around, I believe eventually he will come up with some combinations that will do that. I'm not totally sure that that's the goal, okay? And so I don't know that we're ever going to see that from Erik Spoelstra this year. But to answer your question about the young guys, and this is what I tweeted the other day. There's no reason, and if you read Nekias Duncan on HeatBeatMiami.com, he gave voice to this too because he talked about the ridiculous defensive rating that the Heat are putting out when Winslow, Adebayo, and Richardson play together. It's tremendous. And so this is what I think. Those guys are playing an average of about 9.5 minutes a game. They should be playing 20-plus minutes a game together, at least, because here are the two outcomes, and either of them are better than what we're seeing now. Outcome one is it works, okay? And you have 3 building blocks. And whatever concerns you may have about the guys individually, at least you have a young core that you're like, okay, these are 3 guys that when we get the star to go with them, we're going to want on the court with that star, okay? And so even if none of them develops into that star, they can be second, third, fourth pieces perhaps on a really good team if you get the one guy. And so that's one outcome. The other outcome is it doesn't work and you lose. Okay, you got a higher draft pick. There's no justification, Chris. Like how you get to the end result this year, whatever it is, those 3 guys need to be playing, and they need to be playing together. And they need to be playing over James Johnson, and they need to be playing over Tyler Johnson, and they need to be playing over Hassan Whiteside when necessary. It can't be about the money that guys are making. And they need to be playing over Dion Waiters if Waiters ever comes back. It needs to be about who are the players you're going forward with, and what are the potential outcomes based on whether they play well or they don't play well. And to me, neither of those outcomes is a horrible outcome. So we keep talking about them being stuck. I feel one of the reasons we feel they're stuck is because we feel like they need to force these guys into the lineup because they made terrible decisions and overpaid them. Why? Why not play 3 guys that you made good decisions
because
on?
You overpaid them because they're making a lot of money. Like we can't ignore that. That's how NBA decisions get made. Of course.
Why though? Why? I understand that's how they get made, but like, okay, it's sunk cost at this point. Like, what are you going to do with it?
But it's sunk cost for 2.5 more years. Like, it's not like, well, we can just get rid of him at the end of the year and that'll be that. Like, you kind of have to figure out a way to make it work if they're going to be making 80, 90 million for the next couple of years.
Yes, but do you believe that? Okay, so one of the premises that's thrown out there is that you need to play them so they can increase their value. Why? There's this attitude that fans have that like other NBA GMs are stupid. Like seriously,
right. They'll look. Oh wow, James Johnson at 23-8-5 last night. I'm going to trade for him. Give him a first round pick.
Right. We had David Griffin on the pod, okay? And I know David Griffin's thoughts on Hassan Whiteside because I remember when I was covering the Cavs a lot that one year when LeBron went back there and Hassan, was doing crazy things, for Miami. I mean, the 10 blocks against Chicago and all the rest of this. I had a conversation with David Griffin at that time about Hassan Whiteside. They looked at Hassan Whiteside. They weren't comfortable signing Hassan Whiteside. There are a lot of GMs around the league who feel the same way. Okay. So are you telling me that just because, Hassan, and I give Hassan credit for what he's done this year. Okay. He's been much better than a lot of people, including myself, anticipated. So that's great for him. But do you really think like all of a sudden he's going to shoot to the top of people's want lists? Like, no. Okay. Or Tyler, like suddenly people are going to look at Tyler. Like we know what Tyler is. Like Tyler's a good, he's a slightly above average NBA player.
He's a six-man.
He's a six-man who's worked really hard and has some good moments. There's nothing negative you can say about Tyler Johnson except the money he's making. But the money's not going to change. So Tyler has a bunch of 23-point games and he's shooting 38% from three. All of a sudden teams are going to be in hot pursuit of him? No. So this thing that fans have, you have to play the guys who are making money. Like I keep hearing this about with Dion. Like, okay, you have to get value out of him. I mean, it was a terrible decision by the front office. I said it at the time. Others said it at the time. It looks worse in retrospect. And so you're going to force him back out there. Like, I actually think if Dion's rusty, like Dion can help you with the tanking part of this. Okay? Right? Because he's going to take a lot of shots, whether or not he's capable of making them in the condition that he's in when he comes back. So my thing is, to me, this is very simple. Whatever direction you're choosing here, whether you're trying to move forward for the future with a young core or whether you're trying to lose games to add another young asset, okay, which you can then flip perhaps for something else or keep, the three young guys need to be playing a ton of minutes together. Now, how do you get to that? Well, I mean, it means basically alienating Whiteside, perhaps, because you're going to need to start Bam, okay, at some stage if you're going to play them 20 minutes together.
Or do what they did against Toronto, which is Hassan played 12 minutes and Bam played 36, which is, Hassan is starter in name only, right? Where he does, his name is announced at the beginning of the game, but he doesn't play starters minutes. But again, I feel like, and this is something that Erik Spoelstra is going to have to manage, and I don't know if he's always been credited as having the best locker room tact, like as sort of being the great communicator, is he's got 12, 13 guys that want to play and feel like they should be playing. And especially in the case of the guys that we just mentioned, James Johnson, Hassan Whiteside, Dion Waiters, Tyler Johnson, like they're going to want to feel like they should be justifying their contracts. And frankly, they're going to want to get another one after this one ends. And so,
right. But Chris, my thing on that is this, and this is why I think this start is actually good for the Heat. Okay. This makes those decisions easier for Erik, right? Because, again, Pat Riley has said repeatedly 20 games is the barometer. And if this team, I looked at the schedule, okay, their next 5, they can win 4 of those games if they're playing well. They've got a Phoenix in there. They've got an Atlanta in there. New Orleans is going to be a challenging game, but they could win 3 or 4 of those games. After that, it's a murderer's row. Okay, they've got a ton of road games. They're on the West Coast. They're playing a lot of good West teams. Like this thing, if they don't go 4-1, as we talk right now, before they play Atlanta, they're 7-12, right? Okay, if they go 2-3 in their next 5, which is also possible, you're talking about 9-15 before you enter the more difficult part of the schedule. Okay, with maybe Dragic, getting back healthy, maybe not. We'll see. All right. This thing could get away quickly. And if it does, like, what does Erik Spoelstra owe those players? Like, it's like, okay, we gave it a shot. Okay. We tried to work James Johnson back in the lineup. We gave Tyler Johnson a bunch of minutes. Hassan, you were starting. We're not winning. Okay. The organization needs to pivot, and that needs to be a message. And I don't think Erik would object to this. I don't know his feelings about it, but I think that Erik tends to be a big picture person. Okay. And he'll see the big picture here. But that has to be a mandate from up high. I almost feel like it's got to be Erik telling it to Pat, not the reverse. Okay, look, we need to play the young guys, like, for the future of the organization, because look, Pat Riley may not be here in 2 or 3 years, but the hope is Erik Spoelstra will be. And so where is this organization going to be? They need to make a decision. I think at that stage, we're going young. Like, we're going to play the 3 young guys. We may play Magruder a little bit. Okay, maybe, Ellington's a guy who has value. He's a good guy to have on the court. But I think that's before we get to any trades, which also I think are more possible after December 15th when you can trade Ellington. And I do think he has value. I do think a place like Philadelphia makes sense. I think the other thing that's going to help them, Chris, is that the Western Conference has 14 teams competitive right now.
Right.
There's going to be a market for guys like Rodney McGruder and Wayne Ellington. I don't know that there'll be a market.
I feel like the market is more in the East, though, because if you're in the West, even if you are winning games right now and you are competitive, do you think you're a Wayne Ellington away from beating the Warriors? Whereas if you're in the East right now, if you're even Indiana right now, you're talking, hey, if we get a shooter, maybe we can face the Raptors in the conference finals, and are we really that afraid of the Raptors? As good as they are, I mean, the Raptors are exceptional, but just from a reputational standpoint, do you really think that they're going to go and be dominant in the playoffs when they've been choking dogs in the playoffs for as long as we can remember them? So I feel like in the East, that market will really be there when the Golden State's going to figure it out. Like, unless they trade Durant in the middle of the season, which would be ridiculous, I just don't see how West teams really talk themselves into giving up first-round picks to make moves so they can get to the second round, get to the third round, and eventually lose to Golden State. Today's edition of the 5 Reasons Podcast is brought to you by AutoNation. AutoNation makes it easy to customize your new or used ride with a huge selection of AutoNation auto gear accessories. AutoNation is your one-stop shop to get your vehicle auto gear equipped with the top brands. Schedule your auto gear session today at an AutoNation store near you. Design specialists will take you through the entire customization process step by step, helping you create the vehicle of your dreams. From new wheels to a customized entertainment system, we've got you covered. Qualified buyers right now can take advantage of 0% financing for 60 months. Schedule your session today. Visit AutoNation.com to find your nearest location. AutoNation, a proud sponsor of the 5 Reasons Sports Network.
But what David Griffin talked about, and Stan talked about this a lot when we had him on the pod, what they both talked about was every situation is different. And what you think may be driving a team, like we would assume that what's driving a team might be beating Golden State. But for some teams, it might be making the playoffs for the first time in forever. Like if you're the Sacramento Kings and you're still in the mix and you want to get a group like that has De'Aaron Fox and Willie Cauley-Stein and some of those guys into the postseason to experience that, like it might be worth it to you. You got cap space.
And I don't believe they own their first-round pick.
Right,
so
right.
They have every incentive to win.
Right. So every team has a different situation. Like if you're in New Orleans, right?
Yeah.
And
you got to keep Anthony Davis. Yeah.
Trying to keep Anthony Davis. If you're in Toronto, which has a legitimate chance to win, right? You're trying to keep Kawhi Leonard. Okay. Every team has different incentives. And just the fact that Utah is a team that we thought was going to be pretty good, and they've kind of sunk down to 13 or 14th in the West, but they want to build on their momentum, get Donovan Mitchell back to the playoffs. The fact that there are so many teams competitive right now, if you're the Heat, there's going to be a market for your assets, okay? And they do have some assets. I mean, I start with Ellington and McGruder because I think if you're a good team, like both of those guys are plug and play. Like it's just, they're both professional as hell, okay? I mean, they really are. And like you get Wayne Ellington and he can hoist 10 threes for you tomorrow, okay? And then within 2 weeks, you can build, a game within a game for him, like Eric has done here in Miami. And all of a sudden, that's an effective player for you. Rodney McGruder is just a guy you throw on the court to wreak havoc for 15 minutes on a good team, okay? So I feel like there's a market for some of their players. And look, they're going to want to trade out west. I mean, Riley has typically wanted to trade outside the conference. So I think this is setting up for them to move some of those guys, which may alleviate the stress on Eric also, because if his roster thins out a little bit, okay, and they're picking up some second-round picks or whatever it is, some assets that Riley would probably move somewhere else later on, then he's going to have to play some of those other guys by default. I'm just saying the priority right now, whatever direction you choose, is play the 3 young guys, okay? This playing James Johnson more minutes than Justice Winslow should never happen anymore. It just shouldn't, okay? Whatever you think of Justice, okay? We know what James Johnson's upside is. And so, like, I know you paid him. That was not great, okay? Paying him 4 years was not great. And I like James Johnson as a player, but not great. Okay, even we've started to see with Kelly Olynyk already. Like,
yeah,
right? I mean,
he's a player the league's starting to pass by a little bit, isn't it? Like it really
yes.
feels like because they're forcing him to play with either Adebayo or with Whiteside. That's hard for him, man. Like he's got to be a center on a team. I feel like Olynyk might be a good trade piece, obviously, because I don't feel like the contract's that bad. He's a skillful player, but he's got to go somewhere to play the 5. And
they have 3 guys who need to play the 5.
Yep.
I mean, they have 3 5s on the roster, and they have 6 2s. I mean, look, this, like when you say, is this a bad team? It's just a poorly constructed team. Yeah. Okay.
It's so depressing to say that about a Pat Riley team, isn't it? Like it's so
every team he's ever had has made sense. Until this one, every team he's had has made sense. If you look at the building, let's go all the way back to.
Although I guess the 06 team didn't really make sense. It just
worked.
It
did. It did. No. I'm going to go back on this. I mean, we're having. I didn't like the trades, okay, and I was wrong about that, and I've made a culprit on that a million times, including to him directly. But look, if you look at the late '90s, and we're going to have Tim Hardaway on the pod here in the next week or so, which is going to be a lot of fun. Okay, may not be so fun for the Heat at times because Tim's going to speak his mind. Okay, but if you go back to the late '90s, the whole structure of that, and at the time, Pat adjusted to what the league was. What was the league? It was a point guard center league. He went and got his center. Okay, even though he had to give up a really good player in Glenn Rice to do it, and he went and got his point guard, and then they built around it, okay? Needed a shooter, okay, who would defend 2s. You got Dan Marley, and that was after Juwan Howard was taken back by the league. They got Marley. They needed a guy in P.J. Brown who could defend multiple positions up front, okay, rebound, do the dirty work next to Zoe. Got that player. Added a guy in Bruce Bowen who was a stretch player and a defender at that. That team made sense. Then you even look at the team that he constructed after that one kept sort of knocking its head against the wall with the Knicks. Look at what he did in one summer. He added a Brian Grant, okay, to play next to Zoe. Didn't work out because Zoe got sick, but Brian would have been perfect for in the system. Got a guy in Eddie Jones who was like a Josh Richardson type who could play next to Hardaway, and an Anthony Mason guy who could be a ball handler from the front court. That team made sense. Then you go forward to even the 03 team. Okay, people talk about, well, it was a weird team because it was so young and whatever. And yes, he drafted, and I always give Le Batard a hard time about this because the column that he wrote and the column I wrote in the night they drafted Dwayne Wade, he wrote, why are you drafting Dwayne Wade when you have Eddie Jones? Okay, but so that one was a little odd, okay, in terms of they took the best player. They had to move Dwayne to the point guard position, but Pat quickly remedied it, right, by moving Dwayne to his natural spot at the 2, bringing in shooters to play off of him, like a Damon Jones, then a Rafer Alston, those type of players, to play off of him, the type of players that Jordan played with and Kobe played with because he wanted Dwayne to be a player who was playing the 2 but was handling the ball a lot, so he had a spot-up shooter next to him. That made sense. And even the trades he made, you mentioned them, even the trades he made in the 05 summer, which I didn't like at the time because I thought that Jason Williams was not going to be a player they could control. What ended up happening was Jason Williams was too controlled. They had to tell him to be more aggressive, okay, that year. But if you look at those players, they had a guy in Antoine Walker who could play the 3 and the 4, flexible player, and he was interchangeable with Posey. Different player, totally opposite player, but you could play them together. You could play one instead of the other. He's always built teams. And the big 3 team, right? He has those 3 core pieces. And what does he do? He adds, an above the rim big in Chris Anderson. He adds a Shane Battier who could guard, again, multiple positions, stretch player. Mike Miller could play off of guys. Ray Allen can play. So his rosters have always made sense. This roster is not the worst roster he's ever had with Miami, but it is the roster, Chris, that makes the least sense. And in my view, it is not salvageable. Okay, like this. Okay, it's not. Okay, you're not gonna. This team is not gonna turn around and go 30-11. It's just not. That magic from that year is gone. As Tyler Johnson said, a lot of them got paid. Okay, now I know some of them got paid before, right? They got paid in 2016, but even more of them got paid. I don't think you're ever gonna get that same hunger that you got to prove yourself in the league that they did before that. It's not that it's about the money. It's about proving yourself. And so I think eventually he knows it. They've got to make changes. But what I would say is play the young guys because at least then you feel like this is going forward. I guess the next question, and I know we want to get more into this, is if you want to tank, how do you do it? Because let's look at the Eastern Conference, okay? And I want to go through some of these. I know you did some research on this. All right, so we've already mentioned there are 5 teams in the East. I think once Boston gets his bleat together, right? Like there are 5 teams in the East that I think are talent-wise are above others, okay? And then you look, Detroit's been a pleasant surprise, I think. Blake's playing at a very high level. Charlotte, which was not a team we talked about, actually has the third best point differential in the whole conference.
It's Orlando a game, yeah.
Yeah, Orlando is, and I don't know what they're going to do with Kemba. That could change the dynamic, but obviously a lot. But Orlando is 10-10, but has a worse point differential than the Heat. We'll see how that plays out. But the teams that are, and Washington, we've talked a lot about Washington, and Brooklyn lost LeVert, which I think you're going to start to see that sort of, really affect them.
And they finally have their first round pick, so like they're incentivized to lose as well.
They're incentivized to lose. All right, so let's look at the teams that they're not going to be worse than. And I'll tell you this: they know they're not going to be worse than these teams. Okay, they know it. All right. Atlanta, they've lost to Atlanta, but they're not. Atlanta's point differential is -11 right now. They're not going to be worse than Atlanta. I mean, they're shooting under 40% from the. Are they shooting? No, I'm sorry. They're shooting. They're shooting 48%. So it's not that bad. But basically, they're not going to be a good team.
They're terrible defensively, though.
Horrible defensively. Okay, Cleveland. I mean, David Griffin spoke to this too. I mean, they've made a decision, right? We're not going to see Love anytime soon. Colin Sexton's playing a lot of minutes and playing better lately, but that team's a mess intentionally now.
They told J.R. Smith to go away. They're trying to be bad,
right?
Which, by the way, is the right thing in what they should have done all offseason. Like they should have immediately torn the thing apart the moment that LeBron James announced he was going to Los Angeles.
Well, they got lucky that Love got hurt.
Yeah,
I think.
I agree.
Not that Kevin Love has always contributed to winning on bad teams, but I think
it's just so weird to me that like they go to Tyronn Lue after 4 games. Hey, we want to play the young guys now. Like, hang on a second, what? Like, yeah, we spent the whole offseason with the bluster of Dan Gilbert saying we're gonna try and be competitive, we're gonna try and make the playoffs. And it's like, why? That was stupid. And if you're not gonna tell Tyronn Lue that that's what we're doing, then why are you changing after 4 games? That's absurd.
Yeah, well, I think that's. I mean, I know Kobe Altman had to make the call on that, but I mean, I think that's ownership, basically.
Yeah, it's awful ownership. Yeah,
right. All right, and the Knicks are 7-14 right now. Their point differential is much worse than the Heat's is, but I mean, they could just hold Porzingis out all year if they want. Which
is again probably what they should do.
Right. So you're looking at the Knicks, Atlanta, and Cleveland. The Heat cannot. I don't think there's any way. Even playing the 3 young guys, because the 3 young guys are all pretty good in their own way, and Josh Richardson I think is very good. Like, you're not going to be worse. So those 3 are beneath you. All right. Then you look at some of the others. Chicago. How long are they going to hold Markkanen out? Jabari doesn't defend.
The Heat, the Heat were pretty comfortably better than them on Saturday night, or was it Friday night? Yeah, like it was. I watched the majority of that game. Miami was a good deal better than Chicago. Like even as they were trying to give the game away in the late third, early fourth, like they're better than Chicago. And I guess that for me, I've been a little bit more positive since kind of really examining this, particularly because of the West. There's nobody out west, like maybe Sacramento, but again, they're not incentivized to lose. They don't have their first-round pick. It's just Phoenix. Like Utah's in 14th. Utah's in 14th at 9-11. 4.5 games separate first and 14th in the Western Conference. Like, that's ludicrous. Everyone's going in that conference. Well, and I'll tell you this: they're aware of that too, and I think that may be what dictates their strategy here. So let's finish the East, because I do think the West plays into this big time. So if we're going to say that you're looking at Atlanta, Chicago, Cleveland, and the Knicks.
And the Knicks are all worse. Okay, so the worst case scenario for the Heat, or best case, whatever you want to look at it, is 11th. Okay,
right.
I feel like they could be better than Orlando, should be better than Orlando.
Yep.
Should be better than the Nets. If the Nets want to tank, and they've been a very smart organization about the way they've done things lately ever since Sean Marks came in, the Nets could be worse than the Heat if they want to be. Okay.
And I think Washington too has got to be in that conversation, just because even if they're winning games, I think they're playing a close game tonight with Houston. They're in overtime as we speak. But I think that if they make a trade in which they give up they give away Bradley Beal for a couple of young pieces and some draft picks, they could potentially downgrade on a Bradley Beal trade, even if it does maybe affect their chemistry in a positive way. I think there's possibilities for them to get worse after a kind of franchise destructing trade or trades.
Right. So let's throw them in the mix too. Let's throw Orlando in the mix. You're looking at Brooklyn, Orlando, the Knicks, Wizards, Cavaliers, Bulls, and Hawks. Okay.
But if you're better than all of them, you're in the playoffs.
Well, then you're 8th. Right. Then you're 8th. How did we do that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Oh God, this conference is so bad. Okay, at the bottom, it's not
bad. For
the
love of God, can we get rid of conferences, please?
So bad. So you're right. Right. Hold on. I'm going to do this again. Brooklyn, Orlando, Knicks, Wizards, Cavs, Bulls, Hawks. Yeah, I guess so. Right.
Yeah.
That's what. Well, no, that's 6, right? Am I counting?
No,
This?
that's
No,
seven. That's seven. Yeah.
So you're 8th. All right. So that okay. Well, then
That's
you're just
doomsday.
getting
That
squashed
is
by Toronto
doomsday. That is doomsday for this team. Good
No,
Lord.
Doomsday is 9th. Doomsday is 9th.
Well, no, but ninth, at least you're in the lottery. You probably have a worse record than 3 or 4 of the teams that missed the Western Conference.
I don't think so. I don't. That's what you're getting at.
Mm-hmm.
There are 14 teams in the West that are competitive.
Right.
I think you could be 9th in the East with 35 wins. Okay,
and have like the 10th best lottery balls.
yes, because I think that you're looking at all these teams in the West where you may have, and maybe Sacramento is the one that dives, but I'm looking at the other 13. And you could have a worse record than all of them. Like you could have the 13th seed in the West with 36 wins. I think that's very conceivable. And so I think what we're looking at, I want to get back to the point about the West because I think this is why the Heat feel they have some time to make a decision. Okay. The Heat have never gone into a season. I have this on pretty good authority too. They've never gone into a season planning to tank except for one. Would you want to guess what season that was?
In the Riley era?
Since Riley came, right? 1995, we're going back to.
They weren't planning.
They've
to tank.
only sort of, and it wasn't even a full tank, but it was. They went into a season.
It was the 25 and 57 season, right? In the early 2000s.
No.
I want to say 01, 02?
02.
Okay, so 02, 03 then.
02, 03, and
Okay.
it was not 2007, 2008. They had a bunch of players still
Right,
left
I mean,
over.
right. Like you look at all the team that were like all the players that are on injured reserve at the end of the year. Like it was Wade, Haslam, Sean Merritt. Like they're basically entire starting 5 was on injured reserve.
Well, and they sort of decided some of that about halfway through the season. But 2002, 2003, Zoe got sick again. Okay, in September. It was right before the year, and it was totally deflating because they'd had this kind of collection of misfits the previous year: Kendall Gill, Travis Best, Cedric Sabalos, Jimmy Jackson, like guys who had played in a bunch of other places who still had some, effective time left, but they were not, they were the kind of players that Riley would have paid, $50 million to in the summer of 2007. Okay, but at the time they got them relatively cheap, and so they came into the 2002-03 season, or at least that summer, thinking, okay, we're going to have Zoe back, right? So we'll get back to sort of a playoff place. And then he got sick again in September. And so they went into that year knowing we don't really have a chance, okay? And as that season progressed, and they denied it at the time, but have acknowledged it since, as that season progressed, like they started sort of playing for lottery balls, even to the point of that last game that they mistakenly won against Toronto. Okay, that last game of the season that they wanted to lose because they wanted the 4th best chance, not the 5th best chance, so they could get Chris Bosh more likely. And what ended up happening was they ended up winning the game, and so Bosh went to Toronto, and then the Heat had to make a decision, and thankfully took Dwayne Wade, and the rest is history. That's the only season they went into planning to tank. 07, 08, they didn't plan to, and they didn't plan to tank, Chris, but they knew it would be difficult, and so if it went that direction, they were fine with it. They would push it along. 2007, 2008, they still had some residue from the finals teams. They still had what they believed was a healthy Dwayne Wade. And so they went into that season thinking they could be competitive, and then it all sort of fell apart. And then, like I said, Wade was having experimental knee procedures or whatever, and whatever he was doing, and then Haslam got shut down. I mean, when that happens, Udonis played with blood clots, okay, and never told anybody, right? Like, so, I mean, that's UD. So they shut everybody down that year, and they ended up basically, they didn't get lucky, and they didn't get the first pick, and so they didn't take Rose, and they took Beasley. Those are the only 2 seasons. This is my understanding of where it is right now. They're not planning to tank. They want to see their roster as full as possible. We can argue whether that makes any sense, because whether Dion Waiters is going to help them or not, I don't think so. Whether James Johnson was going to help them, maybe a little bit, but I don't think significantly. They want to see their roster in totality. They want to see their real starting lineup, which, as I understand it, would be Dragic, Richardson, Magruder, James Johnson, and Whiteside. And then a bench that consists of primarily Bam, Wade, Winslow, and then some other piece, whether it's Olynyk, whether it's Tyler Johnson, whether it's whoever it is, but it depends on the day. Okay, that's my understanding. And Waiters is not really in that conversation, but that's what they want to see eventually. They are cognizant of the fact that they may never get to it. And there are just some seasons where that just doesn't happen. Go back to 2014, 2015. Their original starting lineup was Norris Cole, right? Josh McRoberts, with Deng, Bosch, and Wade. That's what they plan to go with. That starting lineup played 33, I think it was 32 or 33 minutes together total. McRobertson never got healthy. Norris was not a factor. They ended up subbing. I believe Chalmers ended up starting again. Like, that ended up not working, and then they traded for Dragic, right? So that never ended up playing out like they wanted. Then even the next season, like, they wanted to have the whole group together, and that didn't last very long because Bosch got sick. There are just some years it just doesn't happen. And I think they're coming to the realization that it may not happen this year. But I do think what buys them a little bit of time before they subtly tank. Okay, I don't think it'll be a full tank, but I think it'll be you play the young guys a ton of minutes, you let them play through mistakes, all right, and you're competitive in games, but you may not be winning a lot of them.
And you close with bad lineups. That's the key to tanking.
Which you've talked about, right? The closing with bad lineups. It's hard for them to do it because a lot of their players are the same, right? So it's going to be hard for us to identify, whereas if, like, some other, like when Phoenix was closing with the lineups they were closing with last year, which was like they weren't even G League players, right?
If they ever mysteriously closed with Bam, Olynyk, and Whiteside on the floor together, you'll know what's up.
right, exactly, right. And they're calling up Mayton from from the D League. Because see, Powell was closing games, with Blake Ahern in 2007, 2008. Okay, if that starts to happen, then that's gone. But I think it'll be more of a subtle thing. But I do think what they believe buys them time, and I don't know this for sure, but they know the landscape of this, is the West. Because if 14 of those teams are going to remain competitive for a while, you don't have to make the tanking decision immediately and still get a high pick. You're not getting one of the top 4 slots anyway, because 4 teams in the East are going to be impossible to out-tank. You're not out-tanking Dan Gilbert when he doesn't have LeBron James. He's that bad, okay? You're not going to out-tank them. But if you know that, okay, the 14th team in the West right now is Utah, like, you have time, okay? Yeah. Because Utah's not going to be a 30-win team this year. They're not going to be a 25-win team. So I think you're watching teams like Sacramento. You're watching a team like, okay, how does Minnesota look without Butler? I saw tonight that Minnesota is closing with Rose and not with Wiggins, okay, next to Teague. Like, they're experimenting with some things because Rose has been so good. Minnesota
they've won 5 of their last 7.
Right. I mean, Covington and Sarge have helped them because, look, Jimmy was not helping them, right? Like, he wasn't doing anything to help them. So they've added players to help them, and Rose has resurrected his career a little bit. So I think you're watching teams like that, and you're saying, okay, how far can we string this along to give ourselves some time to see as much of our roster as we can without losing draft position? And I think, Chris, they have about a month. I do. I think it's going to get worse here because of the schedule after these 5 games.
And by the way, on that, something that I've looked up here, just kind of looking at the standings a million different ways. They've played 15 of their first 19 games against the East. They're 5-10. So they've only played 4 of the 30 games they have to play against the Western Conference this year. So and they've obviously gone 2-2 in those games. There's a lot of games left on West Coast road trips and against Western Conference teams where they're going to be underdogs in almost all of them, just strictly based off record. Yes, and the other thing is, if you're going against some of those teams that are in that sort of 9-14 space in the West and you're losing those games, right? Yeah, right.
Okay, which you're probably going to do, then those teams are not getting behind you. And so I really think that the Heat have time, and I think that may be some of what's going on here, is that they're being strategic about this, where they're watching it and they're saying, okay, do we really need to pull the plug on this yet? Like, what are we losing by waiting 3 weeks to a month? And what you also may have, and I don't know this, okay, this is not a report. I want to make this very clear. I don't know this, but they have a lot of cooks in the kitchen now. They do, okay? They've got, even with Chet Kammerer sort of stepping aside, right, and moving into more of a consulting role, they have Mickey, Nick, Eric, Adam Simon, Pat Riley. Did I miss somebody? Did
Andy
I mention
Ellisberg?
Eric? And Andy, right? Okay, so you're talking about 6 people on Shade, right? How many do we have?
Yeah, Shane Battier. Alonzo Mourning is kind of involved in that capacity as well.
Zoe's involved in some decisions. Okay, you also have other coaches that they do listen to. All right, so you have a lot of different people. I probably said a couple guys twice. You got a lot of different people. Are we sure that all of them are aligned on a direction here? Are we sure?
No,
I mean, I know.
No, I mean, just this roster and what's happened so far this season indicate no.
Right. So, and I know of other times when they've not been aligned on some things. Okay. But ultimately it was, Pat makes the decision. Is that
and they present a united front? Like, these are the kind of situations that test that, right? They test. Well, I'm not going to leak anything. I'm not going to say anything to some reporters. I'm not like these are exactly the kind of situations in which all those things you try to build up as an organization might fray.
Correct. Okay, and then you're right. There usually is a united front, and the PR staff is very good at sort of presenting the one voice, and usually that one voice is the big voice, and the big voice in this case has always been the team president. It hasn't necessarily been the owner because he kind of he has a role in some decisions, okay, and it's big picture stuff, but he's never injected himself in a lot of these situations. I know the Tyler Johnson thing is going to get brought up, but for the most part, okay, as far as we know, he hasn't done a lot of that. I think Mike Miller was another example where that might have come into play. All right. But for the most part, no. And so I think we basically said, okay, the Heat are making a decision. When we say the Heat are making a decision, we basically believe it's Pat Riley making a decision. But circumstances have changed here. Pat's in his 70s. All right. They've got a head coach who would be very attractive on the open market if he ever was. All right. Or for a front office position, potentially. They've brought in somebody in Shane Battier who had a chance to go to Detroit, did decline the second interview, which we all assumed was because he has some role in the organization going forward. They have a GM in Andy Ellisberg, who, if he was on the open market, would be snatched up by 29 other teams. Okay, in some capacity. So, and Adam Simon, who has interviewed for other positions, right, and is attractive to other front offices, right? So, I mean, the whole front office is attractive to other front offices, all right? Everybody's attracted to somebody else. And so I think at some point we have to look at it and say, you know, maybe Pat is not he may be the strongest voice in the room, but even he's acknowledged, like he's put together sort of a team of, I wouldn't call him a team of rivals, which is what you hear about sometimes in, you know, real presidential administrations, like where you have a team of rivals and people actually disagree with you. Like maybe they don't have that, but they certainly have people who have other opinions, and I feel like Pat has heard those opinions,
especially divided among age, right? You have people in that front office who might be a bit more towards the new school, the way that basketball is heading, and maybe, you know, Pat Riley, who's in his 70s, who thinks that, you know, I'm paying Hassan Whiteside $25 million, use him as your franchise center. Like that might be a legitimate thought that's filtering through that organization, viewed through the prism of age, not through the prism of, you know, competing ideas or agendas.
Correct, and you also have a Duke contingent, right? Okay, I mean you do. I mean with Mickey and with Nick and with,
maybe they're the tanking contingent because they want to go get Zion or Barrett or one of these Duke guys.
There are three guys at Duke that you want to have right now. Okay, I mean there are three guys who may be the top 3 picks, or if not, you know, 3 of the top 5 picks in the draft. So I'm not saying that there's major dissension. I'm not reporting that, but what I'm saying is we shouldn't make the assumption anymore that it's just Pat making the decisions going forward. And so I feel like if that's the case, okay, if there are different views of this from different people on which guys to play and what direction to go, the fact that you can buy yourself 3 or 4 weeks to kind of have the decision made for you, right? Like, so again, if you go 2 and 3 on the next 5 and then you hit that West Coast trip and you come out of that thing and you're 12 games under 500, all right, and you're in the 10 slot in the Eastern Conference, like the decision is made for you, right? Like it's made for you. Like at the very least, you're going to play the young guys, unless you're just crazy. A decision's made for you. And so I feel like to a certain degree, that's where we're headed when you look at the West and you say, we're not in a rush to do anything here. And so I guess the larger point of this whole pod is I feel like eventually the Heat are going to subtly tank. Like, I feel like that's where this is headed. I don't think it's going to be
do you think it's a Memphis tank where they were really bad for 1 year and now they're right back in the 4th seed in the West?
Yes.
Where they get the one young player because they don't have their pick in 2021. Although I will say, if I was Pat Riley and the Sixers called about Win Ellington, I would ask, hey, can I get my pick back?
Yes.
Like, that would be the first. That would be the first thing I'd try and get back.
Well, and then if not, I'd say, can I have Fultz? I would ask for, and I know there's a debate in our network about that, but I would
think I'd rather have a 2019 first-round pick from the Philly at 25 than Fultz. Because I trust the Heat's development.
He was the number 1 pick of the draft, Chris. I'm not ready to give up on it yet.
Man, I think it's broken. I think it's broken. Like, legitimately, he's broken. It's broken. Like, his career might be over. Like, I don't think it's exaggerating to say his career might be over.
Okay, Chuck Knobloch. This is before your time. Okay, but Chuck Knobloch was an all-star second baseman for the Twins. He went to the Yankees. He couldn't throw the ball to first base anymore.
Keith Olbermann's mom.
Correct. Right? Okay. Right? Okay. And he still contributed on a World Series team.
Yeah.
It can be done. Okay.
I guess the thing is that
the same thing happened to.
Like you can not be able to throw from second base and hit DH for the Yankees. If you can't shoot in basketball, then
Ben Simmons can't shoot.
Well,
Ben Simmons can't
fair.
shoot. He's going to be an all-star. Okay. The other night I watched Ben Simmons. It was more pathetic than what Fultz has done. Okay. He was standing out at the 3-point line for 7 seconds. Okay, and would not shoot the ball. Like they were screaming at him to shoot the ball. So I feel like Markelle Fultz can be coached to contribute in other ways. And if I have faith in the Heat organization on something more than anything else, it's in the ability to develop players and get them in the right headspace. So I feel like they could do something with him, but neither here nor there. The point is, you should call Philly. There's. I love Wayne Ellington as a player and as a person and all of those things, but like he's not doing you the good he would do them. Okay, and so to me, like that's an easy move. Like Rodney Magruder, and I know he's got a no trade. He would go back to Philadelphia. Rodney Magruder is an easy move. Like it's a great find. But what we talked about at the beginning of this is they've gotten too attached to their own players. Like it's like they don't want to, like they develop someone, whether it's, even Richardson, who is a great find, a tremendous find. But it's like, we developed this player from the 40th pick in the draft. Like we don't want to part with this player. And I was not in favor of them parting with him for Butler. But I'm talking about this has become the Heat culture right now is not wanting to give away their toys. Like that is the culture. It's like
to me it was so sad yesterday that like I saw a joke on Twitter. I think it was Brendan Tobin who tweeted out the Heat just offered Leonte Carew a 4-year deal. Like it's so sad to me that that's the meme with this team.
Tobin is the most supportive guy of the Heat.
I know
of
he's John Wall and Bradley Beal get linked, and there's a picture of Pat Riley with a harpoon on Twitter aiming at the Wizards logo. Like that's Tobin, and yet. The idea that the joke around the Heat is they give 4-year deals to everyone. It's like, how did this happen?
Right.
Like Pat Riley's reputation is, if there's a free agent available, I'm going to go get him. That's his reputation. The fact that now we'll give him a 4-year deal. Again, I've said this before. In soccer, there's an idea that if you're not one of the big teams, you're a selling club, right? That you develop great players, and they come from your academy, and over there they have what they call transfer fees, which is you pay the club for the rights to the player. And for example, Southampton bought a player for $5 million from a lower league, and they just sold him for $75. Like that's how it works over there. You can be a feeder club to the rest of the league, and that's how you run your business. Obviously, that doesn't exist in the NBA, but you can create value from nothing and then send it elsewhere and allow other players, and you basically become this farm, and you still become an attractive destination. They still buy into the culture because ultimately the end game is money, right? If you're James Johnson, maybe you're a little bit upset that the Heat weren't the ones that gave you the money, but you're still getting the money. You're still thankful that the Heat made you some money. If you're Deion Waiters, you're thankful that the Heat made you some money. Like
every agent is thankful to you, right? For doing that. Look, it's the same thing. My daughter has these magnets she plays with in the house, okay, and she builds these really incredible buildings, okay? She builds whole complexes, okay, in the house with these magnets. I keep having to buy more magnets. But eventually, okay, we need to walk in the living room, right? And so we need to create space. And so I'll say to her, Sasha, could we, this has been up for 3 days. Can you build another one? Right? Can you build another one? Can we take this one down and build another one? She goes, okay, Daddy. And she cleans it up and she builds another one. And we have space in our living room. And I don't understand why Pat Riley didn't just build another one. Like you built a James Johnson, you built a Deion Waiters with the help of your really good coaching staff, and you built these players. And why do we not just build another one? Let's tear them down, create the space, and then throw the magnetos on the floor, and let's build a Tyreek Evans, and let's build a Jeff Green, and let's build somebody else, and then we're going to tear it down again and build it again until we get the house that we want in the middle of our living room. Okay?
I feel like this year would have been Ilyasova and Bellinelli just because they killed you in the playoffs.
Right. Okay. Fine. Okay. That's fine. And look, Ellington was good value, so that was fine. Okay. But to me, that's what I understand. So, what's done is done. And now the question is, where do you go from here? And I feel like that's where this is going. I think we're going to have another pod in about 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah. So we're going to talk about the young guys playing 30 minutes a night. I'm talking about Winslow and Bam because Josh already is. But I'm talking about the young guys playing 30 minutes a night. I'm talking about them having a lot of close losses and sort of settling in. And if they make a run to 8 with Bam and Winslow playing a ton of minutes and a big role in that, and they get swept in the first round by Toronto, fine. Fine. Okay. But if they're going to be ninth with James Johnson, Hassan Whiteside, and Tyler Johnson playing those minutes, that's a problem. That's a problem. Okay. That is not better than to have a few lottery balls, okay, or whatever, or even to get to eighth with those guys playing a ton of those minutes. I want to see the young guys play. And I think that most of the people there want to see that too. And like I said, I think they're waiting for the decision to be made for them a little bit.
I feel like the West Coast road trip where they're at Phoenix, at the Clippers, at the Lakers, at Utah, at Memphis, at the Pelicans. They go 1-5, 2-4 on that trip. I think that answer avails itself basically around Christmas. Because then on top of that, after you get back from New Orleans, you're home with the Rockets and you're home with Milwaukee before you're at Orlando and home with Toronto. And as much as at Orlando, it sounds ridiculous to throw that in the conversation. Listen, man, the Amway Center is a house of horrors for this Miami Heat team. So I feel like the answer will be revealed to itself on Boxing Day, basically.
Yes, whatever that is. What is Boxing Day?
Boxing Day is the day after Christmas. They celebrate that in England. I figured people knew what Boxing Day was. No,
I don't know where your British comes from. All right. Anyway, we got Simon Clancy in another pod ripping me probably as we're talking here. 3 yards per carry in saying crikey about me or whatever it is that he says. Is that Australian? Is that British? I'm not.
It's more Australian than British, but the British do use crikey. Yes.
All right. So that's all we have for you today. We'll come back to you on this in about 3 weeks. We're gonna have another episode this week on the Marlins marketing strategy. This is where we're at, Chris. We're talking about tanking and marketing strategies. Also. Come join us. We actually have one really cool event. You don't have to watch any of the teams play. We've totally changed what we're doing here in terms of a watch party. You can watch the Fish Tank guys, that's OJ McDuffie and Seth Levitt, tape a podcast with Mark Clayton. So Clayton's going to be hanging out there for more than an hour. Former Dolphins receiver, going to have great Marino Duper stories, shoeless stories. Should be fun to watch those guys in action. So you can come actually participate with us a little bit. And again, it doesn't have to be in a watch party setting. So come out on Thursday night. It starts at 7:00. It's totally free other than whatever, coffee or food that you buy there. So come hang out with us and we can drown our sorrows together. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to the Fire Ringer Podcast. Thank you so much.